Looking for the inside scoop on tech marketing? You're listening to XTech XTRA, the bite-sized series brought to you by the experts at Fox Agency.
I'm your host, Debbie Forster MBE. Join me as I take a deep dive into the expertise of those who live and breathe B2B marketing every day, the Fox Agency team. Now today, I'm delighted to be joined by Karen Geyer, the lead consultant in industry and connectivity here at Fox Agency. Welcome, Karen.
Oh, thank you, Debbie. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, we've got so much to talk about, but I like starting with understanding how you got to this chair. So can you tell me about your career so far and how you joined us here at Fox?
Well, I've been in the creative industry a long time. I originally studied design and then later business. So brand and marketing has always been a really good fit. Through my career, I've been really lucky to work with lots and lots of global clients across I started in B2C and then in B2B for a big wide range of sectors. So fintech, SaaS, culture, healthcare, all sorts, tech, bit of aviation and some manufacturing. And mainly the industry brands that I now work with supply into those sectors. So actually that detailed knowledge has been really useful.
Great. Okay. So lots of experience that you're bringing to the table. And across all of the industry, you've got all the t-shirts. I'm aware of that. Now, you're the lead consultant in industry and connectivity, and you work with some of the most advanced industrial and engineering businesses in the world. From your perspective, what's changed the most in this space over the last few years?
Whoa, so much change. Lots of investment around AI, which is obviously, I'm sure anybody that you're interviewing will say that, but
again and
again, but it's impacting decision makers and those buyer journeys, which is really, really important in B2B. So for industries that are all built on this relationship selling, it's a really big mindset shift. They're needing now to navigate, AI selection processes that they never needed to do before. LLMs are shortlisting industrial vendors long before they get into anywhere near sales are contacted. So, I think the next development will be around these AI agencies doing the evaluation and, the comparative piece and even the recommending. So I hear by next year, a large share of those industrial RFPs will be pre-screened by AI agents working from, that machine-ready evidence already and third-party reviews and their sustainability disclosures and maybe even, index content. So it's a big shift.
Right. So AI is going to undercut everything. It's changing the rules on so many things. If many industrial businesses are category leaders and they're sophisticated from an engineering perspective, why do you think so many of the brands in this space lack the visibility, the fame that their capability deserves?
I think industrial corporate brands are, they're heritage brands, and so many of them have become logos. But they live in engineering cultures, and those engineering-led cultures often assume that the product is the marketing, and that amazing technology will just magically find a buyer on its own. It's frustrating in some ways because as the marketing budgets then get pulled to that short-term demand activity, and it starves the brand of the investment that's really needed to build the mental availability that's needed to support the demand activity. So it's a vicious circle, really.
And I think it is that change. It's not engineer to engineer anymore. It's not specification and that sort of excitement. We have to really change it. So, I know that we say the best technology can lose to a simpler story told better. What does it look like in practice, Karen?
Well, we all know that strong B2B brands can command premiums. They have shorter sales cycles and higher win rates, and the weaker ones lose the competition and get squeezed on the tenders. That is common knowledge in B2B and probably B2C, to be fair. But to build brand-led growth, it's about taking a really integrated approach, starting with the data, not with the creative, and looking at where the brand sits on fame, on share of search, on, importantly, LLM visibility and market perception. And then really using that insight to develop that unified campaign platform, a core idea that enables separate business units and regions to confidently be able to activate together, one coherent narrative to build the brand. And what happens is it still allows for activation flexibility. That so you've got specific audience targeting and tailored creative and all the important things, like media measurement that make up those campaigns per vertical to drive that demand. But it moves away from being just a comms layer and starts being recognized for driving growth.
Okay, so let me play this through and see if it makes sense to me. Does that mean features, performance don't even matter anymore? Are we leaving that behind? I hear that already, the revolution of data first, then the creative. Where are businesses looking for differentiation if it's no longer just about the features and performance?
Yeah, this market is full of incredible, excellent engineering. These businesses do exceptional things, but they assume that buyers can just evaluate that. And they can't, as we touched on earlier, those buying committees are larger now. They've got broader focus and remit, and customers buy outcomes, whereas engineers buy features. So, but by wrapping legacy hardware in software and services and hybrid ecosystems, like many of our clients are doing at the moment, it moves that relationship. It moves it from transactional and technical to embedded and consultative. And that's where that creative differentiation comes from, because it's really hard for competitors to replicate that.
It makes it stickier, doesn't it? If you're wrapping those things together, you're really making a much longer relationship come through, aren't you?
And it's a far more strategic relationship because it's consultative. It's problem solving.
Yeah, exactly. So then help me take it the next step further. What does strong positioning and storytelling look like in a market that is just, as you said, becoming so commoditized?
It's about really finding something, that ownable category claim, clear targeting, distinctive creative, all those things that we really know, but having something that sits at the heart that is really true to that brand and that business, framing the product story, underpinning it with an outcome-based language, return on investment, total cost of ownership, the things that resonate with these chief revenue officers and these chief financial officers that are now making some of those decisions. And sales conversations, I think, that are led by customers' commercial problems, what we were talking about before, doing that strategic positioning, that problem solving piece, not their product roadmap, that from an engineering perspective. So you're using the story to get the meeting and using the engineering to close the deal.
And I think that's a real shift in thinking. It's moving away from that binary of one or the other. It's understanding how they link together. Okay. All right. But these same industry leaders, these same brands, they're not just an individual entity, are they? There's a lot of global industrial businesses that are operating across multiple divisions, multiple regions. Why do corporate brand and divisional go-to-market so often end up disconnected? And what impact does that have?
I think, if I'm honest, it's down to organizational structure and metric mismatches rather than comms, I think. Corporate marketing measures itself on long-term brand equity or share of voice, and divisional marketing on, the next quarter's pipeline and MQLs. So if they're not both pulling in the same direction from a core positioning perspective, it can become really confusing for the customer.
But we often forget that, don't we? So we may not see it from the customer's viewpoint. How is it that the disconnect could show up for us?
I think it shows up in lots of different ways. Commercially, a fragmented brand cannot defend itself on price, and you get back into that commoditized piece that we were talking about before. I think operationally, if the content and the media is duplicating, it's expensive. And then strategically, the brand cannot flex that in the way it needs to respond to market changes if it's not joined up. And then finally, I suppose it's all down to reputation, isn't it? Customers just stop trusting that brand. Which version of am I dealing with today if you're not consistent? And I think these large organizations, that risk is real, but it's not always visible. I think it only really shows up when you start to measure and look at the gap between share of voice against share of market. And that's an uncomfortable gap. When you see how much growth has been left on the table, it becomes very apparent that it wasn't joined up.
Okay, well, let's flip it and about it from a more positive standpoint. What does it look like when a business gets the alignment right, having one coherent story across the organization?
Ooh, when it's right, the marketing behaves more like a system and less like a sort of a product portfolio. The same story gets told at corporate, divisional, regional, across all those channels, but with the right level of depth of message for each audience. So it's consistent, but it's tailored. That buying encounter, consistent language from website all the way through to sales. So it means that it doesn't matter what entry point the customers come in at, the experience is the same. And that integrated approach is really, really important to campaign development, because strategy through to activation, whether that's owned, earned, or paid, can track all those customer touch points across the funnel. And that visibility really helps on how the buyer's engaging with the content. And you can A/B test it and adjust the campaigns in real time, which is very useful and makes the most of the client's budgets.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let's then take a step back, because marketing is not in a vacuum. And increasingly, there's pressure on marketing to prove its value at leadership level. Why is that particularly acute in the industrial and engineering-led businesses?
I think because a lot of these businesses are heritage brands, and sales has historically been owned that customer relationship. It's been person to person, and it's still very much like that but it has long sales cycles. But buying committees are broader now. There's lots of stakeholders involved, and there's also distributors and channel partners that mediate those customer relationships. And we're a long way away from getting away from trade shows as they take large amounts of investment. And I think industrial marketers historically haven't built the reporting infrastructures to be able to capture the results. So, metrics on things like share of search or brand equity or mental availability even, most aren't tracking it to be able to justify it.
So this again is that shift, isn't it? It's not just the engineer talking to engineer. This is not sales working their magic while marketing sits on the bench. It's both in there working together. But where do you see marketing teams going wrong when they're trying to demonstrate that impact?
I think as they focus on activity, because the tracking's not in place, they're looking at numbers of campaigns that they've delivered, not the impact that the campaigns have served. So, it's linking that activity to pipeline contribution, win rate, share of search. It's really giving them the metrics to be able to justify the impact that they're having. Because often without it, they over-attribute to demand and under-attribute to brand. So it makes every deal look like a paid search win, which sort of overfunds the bottom of the funnel and starves the brand awareness investment at the top. And it's the brand investment and that trust that's earned them a seat at the meeting in the first place. So it's about doing this top and bottom of the funnel.
It's that system approach that you're saying again. It's moving away from the binary of this or that, bringing it together. And I just keep hearing from you the analytics, the metrics, that we have to be driven by that, use it as our proof point, as our guiding light, etc. through that, or we're just going to get ourselves lost. Well, okay, then what does good look like when marketing is genuinely contributing to the pipeline, pricing power, growth, etc.?
So it all pulls in one direction. So we've touched on metrics and that commercial story, that pipeline contribution and win rates. But then there's sales and marketing operating as a revenue generating function, dashboards that the CFO and the CRO have visibility on, shared targets and accountability. But then it's brand and demand, that are both funded and proven, brand investment recognized in that power of preference, being memorable in market, that really strong creative and important hooks, and then demand investment for pipeline. What are those call to actions that are really starting to make people engage? And it's those things working together.
Okay. All right. So then think about across industry and connectivity, what do businesses that successfully turn complex capability into market leadership do differently?
I think they keep it simple. They pick a really credible position, something from a capability and an ambition perspective stand behind, and then they own it and they keep building on it. You know, if you look at Schneider Electric's done it on sustainability and it's leading the market, Hitachi Energy on an energy transition, and then Salesforce on something like no software. It's a big claim, but they've kept going with it. So engineering and technology needs to support the vision, not the other way around. So it's about having ambition and knowing that your capability can deliver against it. So it's translating that capability into outcomes, you know, organizing everything around that customer commercial challenge, and then keeping that technical depth in there for the people that need it. And that's why B2B is so important, because you've got to do the targeting at top level, but you've got to be able to know that technical knowledge as well.
Okay. Well, you've laid it out really straightforward. Thanks. I really have enjoyed this. And I think you've given me a lot of things to take away and to think about how to make that practically work. I love talking to guests about moving beyond looking at the right now and looking up at the horizon. Karen, when you look at the horizon, what is grabbing your interest?
I mean, at the beginning, when we started chatting, we were talking about the changes that were happening in that buyer journey. I'm really interested to see how that audience targeting continues. I think, you know, it's going to be changing all the time with the use of AI and working on behalf of those customers to research and even negotiate purchases, which is going to be interesting. I think it's an interesting challenge, especially for B2B enterprise clients, because and their agencies, I suppose, as they're actually, it's like a category leadership opportunity, but it's presented in the form of a content audit. And I think that's really interesting to explore further.
And I think it is. We're going to have to watch. This conversation keeps changing, doesn't it? It's gone from engineer to these broader groups of people where the impact gets you in the room and the engineers close it. But as AI steps in, it's agentic. It's almost that B to agentic to get to the B2B to close those sorts of deals. So never stops moving.
Yeah, it's so much further than SEO. You know, it's all about being found, and it's all going to come down to the content.
Okay. All right. And then I get to step back and then ask you a question as a human. I love hearing from all the different guests, thinking about what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to that I can add to my list?
Oh, well, I'm reading Megan Hunter's new debut novel, The End We Start From. I don't know if you've read it.
I have heard about it, but I have not read it.
It's a kind of a disaster movie. It's a little bit artier than a disaster movie, but it's a disaster movie. And it's about the vulnerability of new motherhood in a really unstable environment of a huge flood. And it's just recently been made into a beautiful film with Jodie Comer and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Karen, this has been great. You've left me with lots to think about, lots to do, and a cracking book to take with me to read at the weekend. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
And that's all for this episode of XTech Extra. Don't forget, you can also hear from more of the leading voices across the entire global tech community on the main XTech podcast. We'll be back next time with more actionable advice from the minds at Fox Agency. Thanks for tuning in.
Keep exploring the world of tech. Subscribe to our podcast to never miss an episode. To discover more opportunity for global B2B tech brands, visit fox.agency today.